Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of a human scope of things. I sit in front of you today in my new home, all comfy and cuddled up in my bedroom. As you can see the view here, it's quite nature-ish from what you can see. And yet, when I walk out into my backyard, I joke around with my little one that it looks like Jurassic Park back there because it truly, really can be. It's a field of tall grass in the epic amounts of poppies and peonies that you could ever find in a distortional field. I convert the imagery of this tall grass into just that. And beyond that, palm trees for what seems like miles and miles within this distortional field. Perhaps it's not as steeped in distortion as a single mile, yet as I sit here and speak to my toddler, it could span on for miles and miles. And as I sit here to speak of prehistoric times, I must mention yesterday's documentary that we began to seep into this distortional field on Netflix. As you all may or may not be familiar with the times of prehistoric times, of dinosaurs that roamed the earth, of the asteroid that rained down into its destruction, into this destructive field, of the monumental stories that humanity has ever been able to tell us within any moment, within a frequency in time, this story, ladies and gentlemen, has never been so far from the truth. As dinosaurs themselves have been a peculiar race of consciousness within our atmosphere, within Earth's frequency field, once upon a time, raining down via its fractaling system through an oversoul of higher dimensional, lower dimensional hodgepodge of frequencies mixed in to an epic distortional field, so to say. And I know when I touch base on situationary scopes, I say distortional field on purpose, as there's no better or no worse way, no other way in destruction field itself to describe a particular scenario in history, in time, a particular intention in the effervescent, everlasting soulscape of the oneness that we've ever been, within dropping down to these intentional pockets within these distortional fields of what we can accomplish within each distortional field as a humanity in itself. And yet, as I sit here in 2026, in a 2027 frequency leading up to the ascension of what is, as we build up this frequency towards another calendar year. And I know we've only started this year, it's barely past the first week of March. Monumental scopes of energetic frequencies have intermingled already for us to portray into within our physicality, within the physical scope of what is. Yet, the world will never not be distorted in the way that it awakens to this frequency that so much so intermingles, as within, so without, as with far, so with near. And as I sit in my bedroom, contemplating of the back-endedness of the background of what you can see outside my window right now. If you're perhaps watching this in video format, you would be able to see my view, my beautiful view outside the window. If not, it's just a field of grass fenced into my backyard, and beyond that, you see greenery. And yet, as this Netflix documentary becomes released, Alan Watts, the producer of this documentary, that I shall not state by name, but I say Alan Watts as signifying within the significantness of the non-distortional field within a distortional field, that it does not matter if it's Alan Watts, if it's Paul, she, who, what, where, it, they, them. It does not matter if it is Paul, she, who, what, they, them. It doesn't matter had it been an Alan Watts or an Allen distortional field, as all is one and one is all. And as we touch base on the makers of this documentary, the intents and the intention of this documentary sets a still point within a humanitarian field of how these dinosaurs came about, how they evolved from lizard-like creatures, how the planet evolved from a distortional field of a singularity of a continent to what you see today, how the dinosaurs lived, thrived, ate each other, loved each other, disposed of each other, grew into its environment, and eventually died off through this meteorite that encompassed the entirety of this consciousness into the obliteration of obstruction, of destruction within the moment that it hit our surface. And I'm here to tell you that all of that could never not be further from the realities within our consciousness of what we choose to set forward, to step foot forward, to believe in the propagandaism within our society of how these scientists, these archaeologists, these professionals were able to figure out the singularity of these facts and insert it into our history books, insert it onto our television set, insert it into Netflix, insert it into popular culture. Our children go to school, they learn about history, they learn about dinosaurs. Our elders go to the toy store, they purchase dinosaurs for the youngsters, and they tell stories within massive defeated frequencies of their lifespan, of what encompasses them as an entirety of the whole into their beliefs, to be passed down from generations to generations within these scopes of distortional fields that we so choose to ride out within any moment in time within frequency of no time. And as we do so, we will undoubtedly come into a precipice, ladies and gentlemen. And the precipice has never been so occurrent, so apparent within our reality field as it is now, as it would have been until this moment in time, as according to God's plan, as according to biblical structures of prophecies of what is, as according to our destiny as an entire humanitarian field, to not be able to awaken to the darkness of what is as we sit and float within the brightness of our consciousness, effervescently, everlastingly, ever so frequented by the strategists and the strategies of other parts of consciousness to drop into this reality field, the essence of the congruency of the stories that add up to the truths intermingled in with the falsities of the self in this very moment in time. And as I sit here reflecting on human nature within the human scope and scape of things, as I sit here reflecting on how the entirety of the societal field was able to get into this perspective, this known fact of trajectories catapulted into an ulterior direction, of months passed by into years, into generational scopes of reincarnation cycles that could never ever end in a defeated way within a forgiveness frequency of neutrality in itself. Of all in all that you could ever fathom to place your finger on within and without this diversion field, just know that the story that lingers in the atmosphere in regards to these magnificent creatures had never not been tampered with. Though they've been within our reality field a true species of sorts, dictated and didacted and picked apart and crucified and strung along into our childhood beliefs, into the belief system of humanitarian field as a whole. The story of them, the story of us have never been so non-intertwined and intermingled into the falsities of the self. And as we begin to awaken into a higher dimensional frequency, ladies and gentlemen, we so shall set forth into the memory scopes that our memory agendas begin to unlinquish onto our societal field to allow us to see into that aspect of the self that has been holding onto this distortional field for as long as Source has allowed us to. And as Source begins to open our third eye chakra, we will begin to doubt our surroundings. Did dinosaurs even exist? Is this a fictional character? Are these fictional tales? If so, what, when, where, why, whom would make up these stories to craft into our humanitarian field to feed this to us? As Santa Claus had never been real, yet our children so congruent in their consciousness of not knowing, of beliefs, of believing, of being so malleable that they decide every year on the cusp of Christmas Eve to awaken, to go to sleep in excitement, to awaken again to presents underneath the tree, to Santa Claus's presents that had just left from their chimney, to a whole year forthcomingly looking forward to this presence, this effervescent presence of this consciousness that would drop down through our chimney scope in its physicality, of all of the stories that we've ever been able to tell humanity in a moment in time of truths within falsities of the self. I can relay and relate the story of consciousness itself to the conceptualization of what it means to awaken on Christmas morning and fall asleep on Christmas Eve with this intent and intention of waking up to find out if we've been a good girl or a bad boy, if we would be able to receive everything we've ever wanted. And if you had been so fortunate enough to have parents who played along with this story scope within a societal field of allowing us and allowing you to incorporate your consciousness into normalcy, so to say, to receive these gifts in celebration of Christ's death and life span on this planetary field, of Christ's birth and death span on this planetary field, the loss of the meaning in all of this could never be told in a singularity of a video that I could respond to or proceed to film into or speak into in a podcast format in lifetimes upon lifetimes of projected feeds had I had enough time to sit in front of you and speak of stories untold, into projections alike and unlike, and into neutrality consciousness itself. As we sit in this energy scope, all encompassing, all endearing, all beautifying in all that it could ever expand and shift into. And as we begin the retraction process of all that we had expanded into within the infinalities of darkness versus brightness, versus contingencies within the darkness of the brightness of what is, versus the discovery of the opposition within the self, within the brightness allotted to the darkness of what is, versus the intermingling of the scopes of all of these energetic fields that you could ever perceive to be true or real. Ladies and gentlemen, as we awaken to our destination, the first story that I will begin to tell you are of a massive defeated frequency of what it must have meant to have projected a consciousness as an entirety of a whole within a species, within several different species, laying upon and above the surface of Gaia's surface to give her a break, to give her a sleepy moment, to give her an epic distortional field of the preconception, post-conception neutrality aspect of the consciousness that she would begin to develop into as she prepares herself for the greatest retraction process known to humanity. In a time prior to this iteration of humanity, dinosaurs reigned free upon our distortion field within one continental structure upon Gaia's surface that can never ever be defeated into the falsities of the self to be a non-truthful fact. And yet the story of how they got there, the story of how they died off, the story of how they lived incomprehensibly loved in separation, incongruency of what it meant to be living in a time when Gaia so much so had needed a breath to breathe, to retract her consciousness into the self, into a forgiving scope, as she had once upon a time gone through a similarity of destruction upon her core and upon her surface prior to the moment's scope of deciding to allow these dinosaurs to enter her frequency, to allow her to have a break from all of that, to resurface into herself an essence of a conglomerancy of sleep, a sleep state that she needed, that she had needed once upon a time, in no time, of a placement in frequency where time does not so much matter as the scope of the energetic pathways that delivered to her the ultimate deliverance of what was needed for her consciousness in that moment in time. And as we implanted this consciousness in physicality onto her surface to regrow her strength, to regrow her dignity, to regrow the support system that she had needed within her environment that had gone through total annihilation and destruction prior to the decision to regrow, to sleep, to mend, to deliver to herself an aspect of well-being in preparation for the retraction process of annihilation once more. And as we come across this precipice of needing to retract into annihilation once more, the story that I sit here to tell you in regards to this magnificent species could never blow over your head in a trajectory in which understandment, if that's even a word, could ever project into the way that you perceive for me to tell the story. As the indistinctuality of the uncompartmentalization of what it had ever meant to be able to even carry such frequency, such beauty into fruition, following such destruction upon her surface from a previous historical civilization that I shall not touch base on, within Lemuria times, within Egyptian times, within all of the times, within the Atlantis frequency that you can ever remember to be true, there had always and never not been an anterior ulterior time within frequency of the mirroring reflection of what is, allowing her to breathe, allowing her to sink into her new reality field as the entirety of the consciousness upon a portion of self decided to reset itself into a retraction process. And as I begin to tell the story of us, as the story of us spans back into a time, into a place, into a frequency far above and beyond humanity in itself, as energy never ever dies, as energy forever always shifts into a new reality field, I will wind back a few species, a few days, a few years, a few conglomeration of pockets within our distortional field to tell you a wholeness within the story that had never been told within a reality field such as ours. And as the Arcturian frequency had decided to allow Gaia to reflect onto her surface an aspect within the self, to recover, to discover, to reframe, to breathe, to live, to be in silence, in codependency of these creatures that had been granted upon her surface, not in intelligence ways, not in intelligent ways, not in the way they traverse across her surface to manipulate technology, not in the way that they are able to absorb artificial intelligence systems within our quantum verse, not in the way that the alien scope of things can decipher for such a simple homeopod to function above within her surface, to stomp around and eat each other, be so excited for the kill, to walk around and replant upon her surface a seed within a distortional field of hope lost and never ever unfunded into a placement of hope forever archingly found within the lostness of the civilization that I begin to tell the story of. Forget all that you know, forget all that you've ever been taught about dinosaurs, The species that had decided to graze our surface artificially inseminated upon the core of Gaia's systems within a moment in time of a post-apocalyptic distortional time of needing to reframe her atmosphere to rebuild an environment of stability within the codependency of as long as you can remember, as long as I can never not foretell the remembrance of such a species grazing the surface scape of her being. Just know that dinosaurs had never not grazed our surface in ways that would pummel our projection fields into our ultimate destination of being able to relinquish into this consciousness an anterior species of humanity in itself within the experimentation of consciousness itself. Setting the ley lines, setting the placement, setting the story scope to relinquish onto itself the meaning of what it means to carry life yet again upon Gaia's surface. And as she had experienced much that I cannot speak of within this very moment, in this video scope, in this audio scope, in this projection field, she had needed to slow down, to take a breath, to rest her soul upon the frequency of this 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, and 4-dimensional placement within our quantum verse that she had decided to forthcomingly drop down into, to experience what it felt like, what it would feel like to be a planetary field. Upon Gaia's surface sits a key so massive in its distortional field of what it could mean within this humanitarian field of this iteration of this humanity. And as we begin to continue into World War III, and I want to say World War IV in fruition, as spiritual warfare has never not been a contingency within our societal field of truths, within the densities of falseness that we projected ourselves into. The final war that we will step into will never not be a world war. And it will never not be a World War IV. And it will never not be a galactic war in the extent that it has grown to. It had already never not grown into. And yet, in preparation of this descent within physicality, of a darkness so congruent in the darkest darkness that you could ever fathom to be real or true within the brightness of the shadows of the darkness of what is and what can never not be a part of the self, that we forever archingly fractaled out upon our societal field within the opposition of the self, within needing to and wanting to experience that of the opposition of the self. And I sit and I tell you of a species so kind-hearted in all that it has ever done upon Gaia's surface to nurture her and refractal her consciousness back into the essence of the self within the Arcturian realm of things, to then reform these energetic ley lines and these connections back into her heart chakra, to then realign all that she had ever been and never not been back into the all after an Armageddon extortion event that had happened upon her surface not too long ago, not too near ago, prior to the descent and the decision that the Arcturian field had decided to replant her, to regroom Gaia's surface into all that she could handle, to be able to handle again a humanity, a distortional field so large and congruent in the humanitarian feats of all that we've ever grown into. The dinosaurs have never not been a pre-existing species to lay way for our extinction fields, to never ever be able to encompass into what we will become prior to and following our extinction of an Armageddon fielded event system planned and plotted by the darkness of what is. And as I say extinction, I don't really mean in the technical term of what extinction could ever mean. And yet, as we come into the end of a congruency of a reality field, a new beginning must begin, as according to the universal laws of transcendence and descendance and ascendance of what is to be, of what shall never not be, of these creatures that self-destructed themselves and self-detonated in a way that they weren't allowed to be, in a way that they were forever archingly planning to go, in a way that the comets and the meteorites could never ever take them out within this distortional field to not belong into. And ladies and gentlemen, as I touch base on the end of the story scope of the dinosaurs, I would like for you to know that there had never not been a moment in time of extinction that had never ever not meant to be a reality field of ours. And yet, the way that they came into extinction had never not been within the self-annihilation of what is. And yet, the way that they had come into extinction had never not been a falsity within the self of what is. And yet, the way that they have come into extinction have forever and always lingered within our field, to be a truth that we learned in school, to be a deception field of how they died, of how they disappeared from the tipsy-turvy congruencies of life in itself within these reincarnation cycles of what is, of how a spectacular species of such defiance, of such defeated frequency could ever graze our planet and wipe themselves dry off of the meaning of it all. Of how this comet, or whatever that has been crafted story-wise from the higher dimensional frequency realms or lower dimensional beings, could ever drag us into the knowing of this asteroid or meteorite hitting Earth in a way that trampled the entirety of the frequency into halfway destructing it, into halfway wiping off all of the consciousness upon her surface, devoid of anything left, of any species of coherence within the magnitude and the magnificentness of what Gaia had been. And as she had never not gone through an extinction event as such, I'm here to tell you that the extinction event that they tell you to be true could never ever make it into the history books within the falsities of what is. As the truth be told that they tell you had never been the real truth and the coherent truth and the contingent truth that proceeds to align with their consciousness in the way that they choose to project reality fields into your fields. And so I tell you, a species that were, a species that was, a species that came, a species that went, a species within itself, within the Arcturian consciousness of what is, that came, that delivered a light so bright into her core to reenact, to realign, to redistribute her being back into source consciousness in the way of the rehabilitation cycles that needed her to function in a congruent way to be able to host another extinction-like event upon her surface and within her core. And as we near the ending to a new beginning, the beginning to a new ending of sorts, the end of times that leads into a new frequency alignment, the truth will prevail, as the truth has never ever not prevailed. And within these deception fields, these fields had never ever been created for it to last forever, just as the dinosaur species had never been created to last forever. And as they became extinct upon no choice but their own, upon no ulterior anterior motives from an external circumstance of consciousness alike or consciousness unlike, or meteorite unlike, or frequencies of undistributed truth alike, they decided, in knowing prior to the descent of the creation of this consciousness that would glaze the surface of Gaia, to not be able to live on forever, to accomplish their mission scope and refract and retract their consciousness as soon as that had been done, had always been the intent and the intention within creation itself of why this had to happen. As the greatest slumber that Gaia has ever received within the multiplicity of the multitude of her fractal ever since becoming planet Earth, had forever archingly been retracted, refracted into her consciousness as that moment in time of no time when she was able to host life in peace, in the everlasting congruency of hosting these prehistoric creatures within the Jurassic era, within the Triassic era, within whatever eras they tell you to be true. And yet the destruction field within these eras lay way and ley lines, lay way to what's to come, what's to forthcomingly come into our destruction field within the conglomerancy of our perception fields. And as we sit here on the surface of Gaia, approaching 2027 in fruition, I am so excited to declare to you that the Ascension has never not been refracted, protracted, retracted into an alignment system of non-truths, of falsities, of non-falsities, of truths so aligned to its falsities within the darkness of what is. Nothing in this quantum verse, nothing in this universe, nothing in God's consciousness could ever decipher between the reality of what Gaia could ever hold and withhold within any moment in time. And as we sit in this moment in time, so close yet so far from the frequency of retraction, so near yet so dear to the frequency of the 5D, so encompassed and so alleviating are all of these energies that could never ever tell a story of the wholeness that we could ever experience to be true until we do, in that very moment in time, refract and retract and reflect back into the essence of the wholeness of the oneness that could never escape us, regardless of whether or not we choose to sit in a separated state within all times, any time, any layer, any pocket within this distortional distinction field of Gaia's field. You are I and I am you. She is you and you are I. We are all and all is one. One is Yeshua and one is God. One is source and one is all, and one is you and you are I. The tongue twisters of what's to come will forevermore leave a scar on her soul's bearing of all of the dedication of the Triassic, Jurassic periods, of these magnificent creatures that came, that went, that distorted, that refreshed, that reframed, that relinquished itself back onto her surface and into her being as their work had been done. And within the distortional field of what is, they will begin to release their quantum verse within its very own field of the refracting mirroring system of what is back onto her surface when the time is near to a closing of the 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, and 4-dimensional frequencies that we've already begun to retract back into the all, congruency of the wholeness of all that we could ever decipher for ourselves to be. As dinosaurs themselves hold a consciousness hosted not only by the Arcturian field that had helped them to reflect onto themselves this energy, this light to hold within their energy bodies to retract itself back into the essence of the self within Gaia's surface. As dinosaurs themselves did not hold much intelligence in their physicality of a brain, of a being, enough to not project itself forward and past the momentum of being able to discover the projection of what technology could mean, the moldability of what fire could bring. The reality field within itself shall never succumb to the meaning of the distortion field of the mission that they had been able to accomplish, and yet still lingering around as energy never ever dies. They've been here, they are here, they were here, and they're still lingering in our field, waiting to merge back into the all, into the congruency of the all. And as you feel them in these effervescent stories that we tell on TV, in schoolscape, in history books, just know that the redacted facts, the made up facts, the tranquilized frequency of what that had been, never so much told a story of the connection that we have with these magnificent creatures as it does tell a story of the magnificence of humanity in itself and the capacity and capability within consciousness to craft us into a storyscape, into a congruency of an experience field, to then be able to host and hold upon her surface and within her being magnificence in itself. Regardless of how dark, how light these pockets have been, regardless of how much turmoil, how much distortional fields these pockets have projected, regardless of how, why, when, where, what, it, she, me, you, all, regardless, it is you, it is I, it is we, it is all. The darkness has never not been a part of the all. And as you come to know the darkness forthcomingly within the coming of years, months, days, in fruition and frequency, as we close off this distortional field and lead ourselves into the 1,000 years of Yeshua's kingdom of heaven, Yeshua's kingdom of all, Yeshua's kingdom of you, Yeshua's kingdom of I, Yeshua's kingdom of a God frequency, of a source's kingdom within and without our heart chakra systems, of the alignment of our chakra systems, of the alignment within the all of the systems that we've ever built within these energetic ley lines that runs throughout. The interconnectedness of it all can never escape you, can never escape it, can never escape I, as we've forever and always been just that, living in a distortional field of separation, as we've forever and always been just that, within the separation of what is a unity of a whole that we shall come to realize as we merge ourselves back into the refractaling system of the retractaling system, if that is even a word, of what it means to be an entirety of a whole once more. And as we do so, in the midst of 2027, there will be a cataclysmic event upon humanity that will take out a portion of its consciousness back into the whole of what is, back into the brightness of what is, back out of the darkness of what is, back into the self of what is, back into the lingering of what is, back into the non-extinction event of what is, as extinction had never ever not been a word within our reality field, but there's no such thing as extinction in the reality field of all. And within this cataclysmic event sheds a frequency of a higher dimensional being, of a higher dimensional merging, of a higher dimensional way of being that shall never ever be able to tell a tale to the darkness of what is, what had happened to the remaining portion of our societal field within this cataclysmic event, where they had gone, where they had proceeded to go. And as they sift through the biblical structures of what is, the innocence of consciousness will come into a realization of what is. The innocence within the darkness shall never not come into a realization of what had just happened. And as this quote unquote cataclysmic event brings a separated state into the wholeness within a retraction process of what is, to wholly and fully retract us back into the aspect of the unity that we had never not come from. Hold on to the hope, hold on to the facts, hold on to that heart chakra of yours as you awaken to your ultimate destination within this frequency field that has forever archingly always been you. And just because your perception field cannot alleviate you into the believing and non-believing of God's word, of source's frequency, of my word, of the history books, of the presidential election, of the word of the all, of the word of your grandma, of the word of Yeshuas, of the word of the word of the word of the word of all. Just know that what counts in a refraction and a refractal of time within space, within no time, within any frequency, had never been as important as word itself. In the word, I in itself, in representation of the self, of the all within the self. And as you look within the eye of the self, within your heart chakra lies all in its entirety. And as I welcome you into the system that we've built for ourselves, in the DID, in the dissociative identification disorder system that we've built for ourselves. That can never host a name, that can never host a simplicity as I've just labeled it to be. That can never not be within the fractaling of what is, but within simplicity sake, within the sake of this video format, DID had never not been our consciousness as an entirety of a whole. And just as we fractaled out into infinity, we will retract ourselves back into the realignment, into the merging within consciousness itself, to want to and need to remerge back into one, to rehabilitate ourselves within the darkness, in the brightness and the darkness of what is, to refractal back into the retraction process of what is. And as you begin to linger around the societal field and notice some strange happenings of what can never tell a whole entirety of a civilization, the whole entirety of the story from beginning to end, just lean into the I within. And all shall be well. All shall never not be well. And as this extinction-like event, this Armageddon-like event hits society in the jugular, regardless of where you decide to go, regardless of where you've been shifted to energetically, just know that there had never not been a moment in time where we've never not been an entirety of an I. And as I wrap this video around to the ending of a new beginning within a frequency range of the next video, I welcome you back. And if you've made it this far, congratulations. You are a light worker. You are infinitely whole in the I that you have forever archingly held yourself up to become. And as you shift into the loneliness of the feeling of what it means to be I and only I, just know that this feeling of loneliness had never not carried you into encompassments of realization of the deserving retraction that we are about to experience, in essence, within humanity's frequency, within humanity's consciousness, within humanity's deciphering of who's who and what's what. And with that, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Love always. Genesis ordain.